In this video, I'm going to be replacing the water pump and performing a coolant flush and fill on this 1997 Chevrolet Camaro with the 3.8 liter V6 motor. Alright, so what we got going on with the Camaro is the water pump is starting to leak. You can really smell the coolant smell, that sweet smell. So I'm going to replace the water pump, but I'm also going to go ahead and do a flush of the coolant system as well. This is something that's been on my list of things to do for quite some time. Never really got around to it, but now that that thing's leaking, I'm going to go ahead and replace that and swap out all the coolant. So this should be pretty much standard procedure for really any vehicle. We've got our coolant reservoir here, our radiator. The car has been sitting for several minutes now, so it is no longer hot. But let me show you, and I'm kind of ashamed to pull this off and show you what the condition of this radiator is like. Yeah.
Why?
Kind of looks like the Wednesday after Taco Tuesdays, am I right?
That's one flush and fresh bathroom.
So we're gonna flush this out and flush it and get some water moving through here and try to get out all that nasty coolant. And during this process, I'm gonna be changing the water pump. I've got a couple of catch pans. I got these for like $1. I've got a couple jugs of concentrated coolant. This is the all-purpose. Can go in any make model. I've got some coolant system cleaner. It's a chemical flush. I've got some distilled water. So we're gonna mix this up. So we can go ahead and get started and drain the radiator. Okay, I'm under the passenger side of the car. This is the petcock right here. We need to twist that and the fluid's going to come out from that little hole right there and drain this puppy completely empty. The coolant is rather brown colored, pretty gross. I'm trying to catch all the coolant I can. I don't want any of this stuff getting on the ground. I don't want my cat drinking it because I don't want a dead cat. So this coolant has been leaking because of my water pump. So there's not a whole lot of coolant in the radiator, apparently. Okay, while that's draining, I'm going to take this hose off of the radiator. This is basically the overflow for the reservoir. And then we're going to flush out the reservoir. Basically, I just want to drop that hose down and point it down towards that catch pan. And then we'll run water through that reservoir and flush it out. I really don't think there's any coolant in that reservoir right now, to be honest with you. Alright, I went ahead and took the petcock completely out. What I'm going to do is run the garden hose through here and just try to flush out the gunk that's built up in there and through the reservoir. Try to rinse that out as best I can. Alright, there's my antifreeze. Pretty sick. I'm going to collect all the old coolant into some old jugs. I'm going to take this to a recycling center, or typically an auto parts store will take this stuff and recycle it for free. Pretty sick. Alright, so I'm getting a steady flow underneath there and I'm completely missing the pan. Alright, take two. Alright, so that's what's come out so far. You can see there's quite a bit of gunk. That's a good thing. So we'll just keep going. Alright, so I think we got a clog. I believe we got a clog in the reservoir. Because the reservoir is full, and there's nothing coming out of the hose. So I finally got the hose to start siphoning. You can see it's coming out slowly. But it's definitely coming out, and that's a good thing. I began to think it had a clog. Alright, I put the petcock back in, but I just cracked it open just a little bit. I still want water to flush out. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fill the radiator and then turn the engine on, get the water pump going, get the engine up to temperature, get that thermostat open, and I'm just gonna let that water start cycling through. I'm gonna put the hose in the radiator. That way I can always have fresh water going in. Okay, turn the car on. So I went ahead and turned the heater on, full heat, full blast. I'm gonna open the petcock again. Got a fair amount of nasty coolant still coming out. That water pump is really starting to cycle that old stuff out. I want to continue to make sure I've got water going into the radiator. Thermostat kicked open, so we caught all of the bad coolant when that happened. Pretty much just straight water now. Clean, fresh water coming out of that petcock. Now on to the next step. Okay, I put the petcock back into the radiator. I put the overflow hose back on to the top part of this cap. I've got some distilled water. I'm going to pour 3.5 gallons of water into this system. That's what the capacity takes. And along with this, I'm going to pour in some coolant system cleaner. Then I'm just going to run the engine like I did, get it up to temperature, let all the water in the cleaner cycle through the whole system, and then we'll drain it. Squeezing this top radiator hose kind of helps suck the water out. I think we've got an air bubble somewhere in the system, so I want to keep an eye on the temperature and make sure I don't overheat this thing. With the radiator empty, I'm going to go ahead and start removing the water pump. I've got 4 8mm bolts that hold the pulley in place. I'm just going to break them loose real quick with the belt still on. That way I can get some torque on these bolts rather than just having a pulley that's just flopping. Keeping that belt on there works pretty well because these aren't that tight. Okay, I'm going to loosen the belt tension by putting this 15mm socket on here. Now I've got the belt off of the water pump pulley. Go ahead and remove these 8mm bolts. Okay, now we've got several 13mm and 10mm bolts to get out. Okay, I've got 3 of the 13mm bolts out, and you can see that these bolts go through the water jacket. Still a little fluid back in behind that water pump. Got a couple of 8mm bolt, or a couple of 10mm to get out. I've got that 13mm bolt out. So, okay, I've got the 4 3/8 bolts out and the 4 1/2" bolts out. Should be ready to pop off. There's a couple of taps with the hammer. It looks like it's busted free. There we go. Now here's a closer look. You've got 3 of the 3/8 bolts that go around the top, and then there's one that goes directly underneath the pulley, and you've got your 4 bolts. 1 2 3 4, and then 1 2 3 4. So the gasket is still stuck to the engine block. That's on there pretty good. There are holes in the water pump, and you'd think a screw would go through it, but there's a guide pin here and here, and that helps you line up the water pump appropriately. Yeah, I'm going to need to get a little putty knife and gently scrape this gasket material off because it's fused to it pretty tight. Alright, so I'm back at it today. So I left off last night scraping the water pump gasket off. I just took a little razor blade and very, very carefully scraped the gasket material off of the engine block. Today I'm going to take my bolts and I'm going to clean them up, get the goop off of them. We're going to seal the gasket to the new water pump and get this puppy back on. Put the pulley on. Put these on finger tight for now. Alright, I'll put the serpentine belt on and then we'll tighten those down. Okay, we're ready to put the serpentine belt back on, and if I get confused I can use this accessory belt routing diagram on the radiator shroud just to make sure I get this on properly. Just double checking to make sure my belt's sitting where it's supposed to be, making sure it's not off of a pulley halfway. Right, everything feels good. So, okay, with the serpentine belt on, now we can torque down these 8mm pulley bolts. I've got this to 115 inch-pounds. Alright, now we're ready to load this thing up with some coolant and check for leaks. And if there aren't any, then we're good to go. Alright, I'm measuring out my distilled water so I can mix my coolant. I need 2 quarts of distilled water and 2 quarts of coolant. That's not lemonade, folks. Make sure this gets mixed up good. Now we've got 2 gallons of 50-50 mix. I'm going to do this one more time so I get a total of 4 gallons because the car takes roughly 3.5. Okay, water pump's on, everything's back together, torque down to spec. I've got an empty radiator at the moment. I put the petcock back in the bottom. I've got my reservoir overflow tube ready to put on. Alright, I'm back at it today. I've let the RTV sealant that I put on the gasket cure, so now I'm ready to put coolant into the radiator. And what I've done is I've cracked open the radiator, and I've also taken out the screw out of the bleeder that's on the housing for the thermostat, so I just removed the screw. What I'm doing is I've already put a gallon of coolant into the radiator, and I'm waiting for either the coolant to come out of this bleeder hole or for the level of the coolant to remain constant at the neck of the filler hole. So far I've just been adding coolant and it's been settling, adding coolant and it's been settling. You can see that keeps on settling, so I'm going to keep on adding coolant. Okay, so I didn't have any coolant come out of the bleeder screw, so I'm going to go ahead and put this back in and we'll tighten it down. I don't want to over tighten it because there's no sense, and I don't want anything to crack or break, so I tighten that down. I'm putting that all back because the radiator level has stayed the same. It hasn't gone down anymore, I went ahead and filled the reservoir to full hot. So I'm gonna leave the cap off the radiator. I'm gonna go start the car, and I'm gonna wait until I can feel this hose right here getting hot. And then I'm gonna check the level in here, and if it's low, I'll put in some more fluid, and we'll go from there. Okay, with the engine running, I've got the heat going full blast, full heat in the car. I'm gonna keep an eye on the temperature gauge in the dashboard, make sure this thing doesn't overheat. But I'm gonna feel the upper radiator hose, and when that gets hot, I'll check the level of the radiator. And if I need to add more, then I'll add more. And if I don't need any more, then we should be good to go. Alright, this upper radiator hose is nice and hot. The level in the radiator went down, so I'm just going to fill it back up to the filler neck level. A little too much. I'm getting some steam over here because I have spilled some coolant a little earlier. I'm going to go ahead and replace the radiator cap. Make sure my arrows line up this way. I'm going to let it run for a little bit, keep an eye on the temperature gauge, take it out for a spin. There may be an air bubble in there somewhere, possibly, that needs to work itself out, so I have to keep an eye on the temperature gauge. I'm going to keep the heat running inside the car. So we'll take it out for a spin a little later, and we'll see how it goes. Alright, it's been idling for, oh gosh, about 20 minutes. We got a good temperature gauge. Alright, I've been driving for about 10 minutes now, and the temperature gauge has been 185 the whole time. I've got the heat going, and it's blowing really, really hot. So we're in pretty good shape. Glad to have fresh, clean coolant going into the cooler months and then into the winter. That water pump really forced my hand, but I'm glad to have this thing all fixed up coolant wise, ready for the cool months. So